Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change, eventual destruction of our biosphere. And if that sounds bad, it's because it's really bad. Where other channels tend to put climate change at the end of the broadcast, or kind of parsed in with all the other, news about politics, Trump, world events, et cetera, we lead with climate change here, and we might mix in some of those other things as well, because all those things are pertinent to what's going on in the big picture. But the big picture really spells out the fact that we need to address the upcoming sixth mass extinction. We really need to address that, folks, before we do anything else. Before we argue or debate about any other subject, we need to address the fact that we are destroying our biosphere wholesale, hand over fist, as fast as we can, with no signs of stopping. That is a huge, huge problem. So I'm going to do what I do every day, which is provide evidence of the fact that we are, we're in big trouble, and nobody's making this up. I was actually watching a Jimmy Dore video a little bit earlier, and one of the few channels that actually covers climate change in a serious way, and he just covered something about, maybe I'll dig up that article and stick it into this video, but fishermen are suing oil companies for damages because climate change has affected their business. And Jimmy Dore covers this topic very well. Maybe I'll just link the video and you guys can go watch the video. But and he also addresses deniers in a very good way, which is that 97% of scientists aren't making this up in order to make money. That's not what they're doing. In fact, the fact of the matter is that scientists can't say how bad it is because they might lose their jobs. Scientists actually have a hard time addressing the seriousness of this situation because it will impact their livelihood. So it's actually the reverse. They're doing this because it's actually happening, and they're concerned and they're worried, and they're trying to let people know. But the powers that be hold the purse strings, and the powers that be hold the purse strings of the news, and they don't want this getting out. I'm going to link that video. I'm also going to link an interesting video. As you know, the administration was at the recent climate talks in Katowice, Poland. I guess that's how you say it. And Amy Goodman basically chased down one of the speakers there. It's funny, it's interesting, it's also pretty infuriating and sad all at the same time. So I'm going to link that video. Check that out if you will. I'm going to read this article from Truth Out. From insects to starfish, we're edging toward biological annihilation. And this is authored by Subhankar Banerjee. December 11th. If you've been paying attention to what's happening to the non-human life forms with which we share this planet, you've likely heard the term the sixth extinction. If not, look it up. After all, superb environmental reporter Elizabeth Kolbert has already gotten a Pulitzer Prize for writing a book with that title. Whether the sixth mass species extinction of Earth's history is already or not quite yet underway may still be debatable. But it's clear enough that something's going on, something that may prove even more devastating than a mass of species extinctions, the full-scale winnowing of vast populations of the planet's invertebrates, vertebrates, and plants. Think of it, to introduce an even broader term as a wave of biological annihilation that includes possible species extinctions on a mass scale, but also massive species die-offs and various kinds of massacres. Someday, such planetary winnowing may prove to be the most tragic of all the grim stories of human history now playing out on this planet. even if to date it's gotten far less attention than the dangers of climate change. In the end, it may prove more difficult to mitigate than global warming. Decarbonizing the global economy, however hard, won't be harder or more improbable than the kind of wholesale restructuring of modern life and institutions that would prevent species annihilation from continuing. Wholesale restructuring of modern life and institutions. If politicians aren't talking about that, they are not worth listening to. Any politician, any presidential candidate who doesn't have climate change, mitigating, addressing the problem of climate change as their #1 platform in the 2020 elections is not to be taken seriously, is not to be considered, is not to be listened to, is not to be funded, is not to be donated to. That's just straight up. And I'm going to say this loudly for the next 2 years. Any politician who is not addressing climate change as the #1 platform issue is not worth listening to. All other issues are subordinate to climate change. Not the economy, not jobs, not the military, not blah, 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 not funding, not, schools are important, totally. Healthcare is important, totally. Making sure people have, enough money in the bank or housing or places to live, totally important. We should be addressing all of those things, absolutely. At the same time, but we also need to address climate change, and that needs to be #1 on the totem pole. With that in mind, come along with me on a topsy-turvy journey through the animal and plant kingdoms to learn a bit more about the most consequential global challenge of our time. Insects are vanishing. When most of us think of animals that should be saved from annihilation, near the top of any list are likely to be the stars of the animal world: tigers and polar bears, orcas and orangutans, elephants and rhinos, and other similarly charismatic creatures. Few express similar concern or are likely to be willing to offer financial support to save insects. The few that are in our visible space and cause us nuisance, we regularly squash, crush, or take out en masse with Roundup. Super key, great point. Love this point. We're just insect killing machines, us humans. Oh my God, I hate spiders. Oh, these ants, they're bothering me. Jesus, can we get rid of these flies? They're not even considered worthy of saving. We like bees because they're cute and they actually, help bring us food, but, and butterflies are awful pretty, but we don't think about all the other insects performing functions in the environment, and they all do. They do not deserve to die just because they bother you. As it happens, though, of the nearly 2 million known species on the planet, about 70% of them are insects, and many of them are as foundational to the food chain for land animals as plankton are for marine life. Harvard entomologist and ant specialist E.O. Wilson once observed that if insects were to vanish, the environment would collapse into chaos. And guess what's happening? Guess what we're 70 or 80% of the way to? Insects vanishing completely. In fact, insects are vanishing. Almost exactly a year ago, the first long-term study of the decline of insect populations. I've read many, many articles about this already. Team of scientists concluded that flying insect population had dropped by a staggering 76% over a 27-year period. What could be contributing to such a collapse? It certainly is human caused, but the factors involved are many and hard to sort out, including habitat degradation and loss, the use of pesticides in farming, industrial agriculture, pollution, climate change, and even insidiously enough, light pollution that leads nocturnal insects astray and interrupts their mating. This past October, yet more troubling news arrived when American entomologist Bradford Lister first visited El Yunque National Forest in Puerto Rico in 1976. Little did he know that a long-term study he was about to embark on would, 40 years later, reveal a hyper-alarming new reality. In those decades, populations of arthropods, including insects and creepy crawlies like spiders and centipedes, had plunged by an almost unimaginable 98% in El Yunque the only tropical rainforest within the U.S. National Forest System. Unsurprisingly, insectivores, populations of animals that feed on insects, including birds, lizards, toads, had already experienced similarly dramatic plunges, with some species vanishing entirely from that rainforest. And all of that happened before Hurricane Maria battered El Yunque in the fall of 2017. What had caused such devastation after eliminating habitat degradation or loss? After all, it was protected national forest, and pesticide use, which in Puerto Rico had fallen by more than 80% since 1969. Lister and his Mexican colleague Andres Garcia came to believe that climate change was the culprit, in part because average maximum temperature in the rainforest had increased by 4 degrees Fahrenheit over the same 4 decades. We've covered this many, many times. Even though both scientific studies and anecdotal stories about what might be thought of as kind of an insecticide have at this point come only from Europe and North America. Many entomologists are convinced that the collapse of insect populations is a worldwide phenomenon, as extreme weather events, fires, floods, hurricanes begin to occur more frequently globally. Connecting the dots across the planet has become a staple of climate change communication to help the public understand how individual events are part of a larger trend. Now, such thinking has to be transferred to the world of the living, so as in the case of plummeting insect populations and the creatures that feed on them, biological annihilation sinks in at the same time. What's driving such death spirals in any given place, from pesticides to climate change to habitat loss, may differ, making biological annihilation an even more complex phenomenon than climate change. Yes, this is really happening. Nobody is making this up. Nobody is skewing numbers. Nobody's frightening you for nefarious reasons. They're telling you the truth. This is what's happening, and it needs to be. This is alarming, about as alarming as it gets. Fishermen are suing oil companies because they have no fish. They're not making it up. They're not inventing this for some, the fish aren't all dying because some government, whatever, some globalist elitist kind of, we're doing things and we're killing all the fish because we want control of the people. No, I mean, they want you to they want you to take all the fish out of the ocean and eat them and buy the fish because, it's part of our economy, and that's what we do. We annihilate everything. We think we can, take everything we want and package it up and sell it to other people and make money on it, and we don't. But where it came from somewhere, we didn't actually. Somebody just went out and just got it. And the days of that are soon about to go away. The edge of the sea, the animal kingdom, is composed of two groups: invertebrates, or animals without backbones, or vertebrates, which have them. Insects are invertebrates, as are starfish, anemones, corals, jellyfish, crabs, lobsters, and many more species. In fact, invertebrates make up 97% of the known animal kingdom. In 1955, environmentalist Rachel Carson's book, The Edge of the Sea, was published, bringing attention for the first time to the extraordinary diversity and density of the invertebrate life that occupies the intertidal zone. Even now, more than half a century later, you probably never considered that environment, which might be thought of as the edge of the sea, or actually the ocean, as a forest. Neither did I, not until I read nature writer Tim McNulty's book, Olympic National Park, A Natural History, some years ago. Excuse me. As he pointed out, the plant associations of the low tide zone are commonly arranged in multi-storied communities, not unlike the layers of an old-growth forest. And in that old-growth forest, the starfish, or sea star, rules as the top predator of the near shore. In 2013, a starfish die-off, from a sea star wasting disease caused by a virus, I was just talking about this yesterday, was first observed in Washington's Olympic National Park. Though it was hardly confined to that nature preserve, by the end of 2014, as Linda Mapes reported in the Seattle Times, more than 20 species of starfish from Alaska to Mexico had been devastated. At the time, I was living in the Olympic Peninsula, and so started writing about it, and as a photographer, documenting that die-off, a painful experience after having read Carson's exuberant account of that beautiful creature. The following summer, though, something magical happened. I suddenly saw baby starfish everywhere. Their abundance sparked hope among park employees I spoke with that if they survived, most of the species would bounce back. Unfortunately, that did not happen. While younger sea stars took longer to show symptoms, once they did, they died right away. Mapes reported that die-off was so widespread along the Pacific coast in many sites, more than 99% of them, that scientists considered it unprecedented in geographic scale. The cause? Consider it the starfish version of a 1-2 punch. The climate change-induced warming of the Pacific Ocean put stress on the animals while it made the virus that attacked them more virulent. Think of it as a perfect storm for unleashing such a die-off. It will take years to figure out the true scope of the aftermath, since starfish occupy the top of the food chain at the edge of the ocean, and their disappearance will undoubtedly have a cascading impacts, not unlike the vanishing of the insects that form the base of the food chain on land. Concurrent with the disappearance of the starfish, another unprecedented die-off was happening at the edge of the same waters, along the Pacific coast of the US and Canada. It seemed to be one of the largest mass die-offs of seabirds ever recorded. Craig Welch wrote in National Geographic in 2015, and many more have been dying ever since, including Casson's auklets, thick-billed murres, I think that's how you pronounce it, I'm not sure, common murres or murrays, fork-tailed petrels, short-tailed shearwaters, black-legged kittiwakes, and northern fulmars. That tragedy is still ongoing, and its nature is caught in the title of the September article in Audubon magazine. In Alaska, starving seabirds and empty colonies signal a broken ecosystem. To fully understand all of this, the dots will again have to be connected across places and species as well over time. But the great starfish die-off is an indication that biological annihilation is now an essential part of life at the edge of the sea. The annihilation of vertebrates. The remaining 3% of the kingdom Animalia is made up of vertebrates. The 62,839 known vertebrate species include fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. The term biological annihilation was introduced in 2017 in the seminal paper by scientists Geraldo Ceballos, Paul Ehrlich, and Rodolfo Durzo, whose research focused on the population declines as well as extinctions, or vertebrate species. Our data, they wrote then, indicate that beyond global species extinctions, the Earth is experiencing a huge episode of population declines and extirpations. If anything, the 148-page Living Planet report, published this October by the World Wildlife Fund International and the Zoological Society of London, only intensifies the sense of urgency in their paper. As a comprehensive survey of the health of our planet and the impact of human activity on other species, its key message was grim indeed. Between 1970 and 2014, it found monitored population of vertebrates had declined in abundance by an average of 60% globally, with particular pronounced losses in the tropics and in freshwater systems. South and Central America suffered a dramatic loss of 89%. Of such vertebrates, while freshwater populations of vertebrates declined by a lesser but still staggering 83% worldwide. The results were based on 16,704 populations of 4,005 vertebrate species, which meant that the study was not claiming a comprehensive census of all vertebrate populations. It should instead be treated as a barometer of the trends in monitored populations of them. What could be driving such an annihilatory wave to almost unimaginable levels? The report states that the main causes are overexploitation of species, agriculture, and land conversion, all driven by runaway human consumption. It does, however, acknowledge that climate change, too, is a growing threat. Runaway human consumption. Let me repeat that one more time. Runaway human consumption. We are eating the planet to death. We are consuming and making and manufacturing and shipping and wrapping and buying the planet to death. We are driving and flying and deforesting and eating and growing the planet to death. When it comes to North America, the report shows that the decline is only 23%. Not so bad, right? Such a statistic could mislead the public into thinking that the US and Canada are in little trouble, and yet in reality, insects and other animals, as well as plants, are dying across North America in surprisingly large numbers. From my doorstep to the world across time. I'm going to try and finish this article, but I think that it might be too long. I didn't even really realize I was going to read this much of this article, but here we are. From my doorstep to the world across time, my own involvement with biological annihilation started at my doorstep in March 2006. A couple of days after moving into a rented house in northern New Mexico, I found a dead male house finch, a small songbird, on the porch. It had smashed into one of the building's large glass windows and died. At the same time, I began to note startling numbers of dead pinon, New Mexico's state tree, everywhere in the area. Finding that dead bird and noting those dead trees sparked a desire in me to know what was happening in this new landscape of mine. Wow. More noticing of dead trees. When you, when you think of old growth forest, and here I don't mean the underwater version of one, but the real thing, what comes to your mind? Certainly not the desert Southwest, right? The trees here don't ever grow tall enough for that. An 800-year-old pinon may reach a height of 24 feet, not the 240 feet of a giant Sitka spruce or similar age in the Pacific Northwest. In the last decade, however, scientists have begun to see the pinyon juniper woodlands here as exactly that. I first learned this from a book, Ancient Pinyon Juniper Woodlands, A Natural History of Mesa Verde Country. It turns out that this low canopy, sparsely vegetated woodland ecosystem supports an incredible diversity of wildlife. In fact, as a state, New Mexico has among the greatest diversity of species in the country. It's second in diversity of native mammals, third in birds, and fourth in overall biodiversity. Take birds. Trailing only California and Arizona, the state harbors 554 species, nearly half of the 1,114 species in the U.S. And consider this not praise for my adopted home, but a preface to a tragedy. Before I could even develop a full appreciation of the pinyon juniper woodland, I came to realize that most of the mature pinyon in northern New Mexico had already died. Between 2001 and 2005, a tiny bark beetle known by the name of Ips confusus had killed more than 50 million of them, about 90% of the mature ones in northern New Mexico. This happened thanks to a combination of severe drought and rapid warming, which stressed the trees while providing a superb environment for beetle populations to explode. And this, it turned out, wasn't in any way an isolated event. Multiple species of bark beetles were by then ravaging forests across North American West. The black spruce, the white spruce, the ponderosa pine, the lodgepole pine, the white bark pine, and the pinyon were all dying. In fact, trees are dying all over the world. In 2010, scientists from a number of countries published a study in forest ecology and management that highlights global climate change-induced forest mortality with data recorded since 1970 in countries ranging from Argentina and Australia to Switzerland and Zimbabwe, Canada and China to South Korea and Sri Lanka. The damage to trees has been significant. And everybody is reporting this all over the place, all over this channel. People are reporting dead trees in almost every region of the earth. You can just walk out your door and see it here in LA. It's all over the place. In 2010, trying to absorb the larger ecological loss, I wrote hundreds of millions of trees have recently died, and many more hundreds of millions will soon be dying. Now think of all the other lives, including birds and animals, that depended on those trees. What happened to them, and how do we talk about that which we can't see and will never know? In fact, in New Mexico, we are finally beginning to find out something about the size and nature of that larger loss. Earlier this year, Los Alamos National Laboratory ornithologist Jean Fair and her colleagues released the results of a 10-year bird study on the Pajarito Plateau of New Mexico's Jemez Yemez Mountains, where some of the worst pinyon die-offs have occurred. The study shows that between 2003 and 2013, the diversity of birds declined by 45%, and bird populations on average decreased by a staggering 73%. Consider the irony of that on a plateau whose Spanish name, pajarito, means little bird. The pinyon die-off that led to the die-off of birds is an example of connecting the dots across species and over time in one place. Co-collapse, co-extinctions, co-die-offs. It's also an example of what writer Rob Nixon calls slow violence, and that slowness, even if it's speedy indeed on the grand calendar of biological time, and the need to grasp the annihilatory dangers in our world will mean staying engaged way beyond any normal set of news cycles. It will involve what I think of as long environmentalism. Let's return then to that dead finch on my porch. I'm sorry, guys, if this is going very long, but this is a good article and I want to read most of it. A study published in 2014 pointed out that as many as 988 million birds die each year in the US by crashing into glass windows. Even worse, domestic and feral cats kill up to 2.4 billion birds, wow, and 12.3 billion small mammals annually in this country. In Australia and Canada, two other places where such feline slaughters of birds have been studied, the estimated numbers are 365 million and 200 million, respectively. Another case of connecting the dots across places and species when it comes to the various forms of biological annihilation underway on this planet. Those avian massacres, one of the result of modern architecture and our desire to see the outside from the inside, the other stemming from our urge for non-human companionship, indicate that climate change is but one cause of planet-wide trend toward biological annihilation, and this is hardly a contemporary story. It has a long history, including, for instance, the mass killing of Arctic whales in the 17th century, which generated so much wealth that it helped to make Netherlands into one of the richest nations of that time. In other words, Arctic whaling provided to be an enabler of the golden age of the Dutch Republic, the era when Rembrandt and Vermeer made painting still appreciated today. Not to mention the enslavement and absolute raping of the African continent by the Dutch. I'm sure that helped make them rich too. The large-scale massacre and near extinction of the American bison or buffalo in the 19th century, to offer a more modern example, paved the way for the white settler colonial expansion into the American West while destroying Native American food security and a way of life. As a U.S. Army colonel put it, then kill every buffalo you can. Every buffalo dead is an Indian gone. Today, such examples have not only multiplied drastically, but are increasingly woven into human life and life on this planet in ways we still hardly notice. These, in turn, are being exacerbated by climate change, the human-induced warming of the world. To mitigate the crisis, to save life itself, would require not merely the replacement of carbon-dirty fossil fuels with renewable forms of energy, but a genuine reevaluation of modern life and its institutions. In other words, to save the starfish, the pinyon, the birds, the insects, and us in the process has become the most challenging and significant ethical obligation of our increasingly precarious time. That was a wonderful article. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. I'm going to leave it at that for this video. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.